The Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, territorial juggernauts that expanded in every direction outwards from the capital in Moscow. As Russian power and territory grew, many different, non-Russian peoples began to find themselves subjects of Russia. When the communist superpower finally collapsed in on itself in 1991, many of these peoples, Uzbeks, Turkmens, Georgians, and others, tasted independence for the first time in centuries. But millions didn't. You see, the Russian Federation is merely the latest incarnation of Russia's long list of empires, even if its size is reduced. Today's Russian Federation, like the empires before it, is like a box, with all these republics packed inside it. You may have heard the term prison of nations to describe the Russian Empire, a term coined by founder of the USSR, Vladimir Lenin. Lenin wanted more decentralization for the many peoples of the Russian Empire. The collapse of Tsarism in 1917 spawned many new short-lived nations that were quickly reabsorbed once the Red Army emerged triumphant in the Russian Civil War. However, Lenin was quick to grant the reconquered nations some form of autonomy within the borders of the new USSR, establishing new republics within the Union. The plot thickens though, as Lenin also opted to create republics within the republics, creating autonomous republics within the country for many of the nation's 190 non-Russian ethnicities. And guess what? They're still standing today, just like little nesting dolls inside the big nesting doll of the Kremlin. But how did Russia get so big and diverse in the first place? Well, to sum it up in a sort of quick way, the roots of the Russian state can be traced back to the medieval state of Kievan Rus, the first unified East Slavic state emerging in the 9th century. 4 centuries later, the Mongol Empire invaded the Kievan Rus, subjugating the already divided nation. For 2 centuries, the Mongols ruled. But gradually, the Principality of Moscow emerged as the most powerful of the many principalities due to its strategic location, making it hard to invade and smart political maneuvering with Mongols from its leaders. They gradually began to expand their borders and influence, especially under Ivan the Great, growing from just this in 1300 to this by 1533, annexing most of the other principalities around it. They were then able to defeat and declare independence from Mongol rule, laying the foundation for the Tsardom of Russia in 1547. This marked the beginning of Russia's transformation into a multi-ethnic and multi-religious empire. From 1550 to 1700, Russia grew by an average of 14,000 square miles per year from military campaigns. Early on, the conquest of the Khanate of Kazan and the Khanate of Astrakhan brought the Volga River region under Russian control, which not only secured Russia's eastern borders, but also opened up trade routes to Persia and the Middle East, and began the Russian advance into Siberia. The Russian political elite promoted the colonization of Siberia as a means of transforming the Tsardom of Russia into an international economic power, made possible by the exploitation of Siberia's resources, not to mention to not be left in the dust of European powers busy colonizing the New World, something the Russians were unable to do due to their geographic location. Russia began to build settlements further east past the Urals, eventually reaching the Pacific coast in 1639. Unlike what the European powers did, also to the benefit of Russia, Siberia wasn't just turned into a series of colonies, but rather fully integrated into Russian territory, with their leaders being allowed to maintain control of their land if they recognized Russian rule. By incorporating Siberia into Russia this way, Russia managed to maintain control of the region for centuries, while other European powers lost control of their colonies over time. Then there was the 13 Years' War with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, where they gained parts of Ukraine and Belarus, and the Great Northern War against Sweden, where they gained territories of Estonia, Livonia, and part of Karelia. Before you knew it, Russia went from this in 1500 to this in 1700. Then the Tsardom was reformed into the Russian Empire, where through various wars they were able to annex Finland, gain some of Poland, and annex land near the Black Sea from the Ottomans. For many of the same reasons they colonized Siberia, they now did the same in Central Asia, gaining even more land, resulting in the Russian Empire becoming the 3rd largest empire in history, covering an area of approximately 8.8 million square miles with a population of over 125 million people, surpassed only by the British and Mongol empires. This was, for the most part, the territorial extent of Russia at its peak, and after the empire collapsed and soon became the USSR in 1922 after the Civil War, it inherited most of this land. Now, that's the story of how Russia grew so big and diverse, but how they've remained so is a whole different thing. After the Civil War, when Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks rose to power, instead of establishing a nation-state, they rather supported a policy of national delimitation. Being influenced by Marxist principles, which included the right of self-determination for all nationalities, he believed that supporting the rights of oppressed nationalities to self-determination would weaken imperialist powers and promote the global revolution. But also, he recognized that a centralized nation-state could not effectively manage this amount of diversity without causing resentment and national separatism among non non-Russian nationalities. So lo and behold, like unleashing a floodgate, an incredible amount of federal subjects within the Soviet Union were created. But we're not here to talk about the Soviet Union overall, as we know that it eventually collapsed and lost all of its republics, which are now independent countries. But instead, we're focusing on Russia itself, this big piece of land. At this point in time, it was known as the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. From here, really till even today, much of how the ethnic divisions of Russia are done was due to this period. Through these 83 federal subjects, they divided up like this. There's 21 republics, each with its own constitution, language, legislature, and even national anthem, but represented by the federal government in international affairs. There's 46 oblasts and 9 krais, which can be grouped together because they're legally the same thing, only differing in name due to tradition, with krais usually near the borders of the country, bigger and further east. But what these are basically the equivalent of US states, with their own state governments. Then there's 4 autonomous okrugs, which are often governed by krais and oblasts, and are for populations with even smaller indigenous or minority populations. Their autonomy is specifically designed to protect the rights and livelihoods of these communities. There's also the autonomous oblasts, of which there's only one now, the Jewish Autonomous Oblast, though there used to be 4 back during the Soviet Union. These are like oblasts with their own governing bodies, but also have additional rights to enact laws and policies that support the culture and educational needs of their minority populations. They're like in between oblast and republic. Lastly, there's the 2 federal cities, which are Moscow and St. Petersburg. They're considered so important that they function independently from their surrounding oblasts. Just imagine if New York City was its own state, and you'll get the picture. And together, these federal subjects make up the now Russian Federation. Keyword, federation, because Russia really is just a bunch of many countries in one. See, when the Soviet Union collapsed and the newly formed Russia was at its weakest, then President Boris Yeltsin feared that the ethnic minorities of these regions, who made up almost 20% of Russia's population, or 24 million people, would secede from Russia like the Eastern Bloc had from the USSR. So he famously told the regions of Russia to, quote, take as much sovereignty as they could swallow.
Мы говорим башкирскому народу, правительству Башкирии, вы возьмите ту долю власти, которую сами можете проглотить.
Which they definitely did. Capitalizing on Russia's instability, they gained broader powers over their natural resources, law enforcement, and even some aspects of foreign relations and economic policies. But that was until Putin was elected.
Клянусь уважать и охранять права и свободы человека и гражданина.
Sort of like how going from Lenin to Stalin as leader of the Soviet Union marked a significant shift towards greater centralization, Russification, and repression of national identities and autonomy. The same happened under Putin. Early into his first term, Putin created 7 large districts that made up the entirety of the federation in order to monitor consistency between the federal and regional laws, and ensure governmental control over all agencies of the region. He even changed the system, whereas before regional governors were elected positions, whereas now they're basically chosen straight from the Kremlin. But still, he can't take away the uniqueness of each individual republic. And that's exactly what I want to focus on, the 21 republics, or rather just a few of them. The ones I found the most interesting, the ones that will show just how diverse Russia is. Starting with the one that has the largest population of them all, at 4.1 million people, is Bashkortostan, home to the indigenous Bashkir people. While basically all of them speak Russian, they also speak Bashkir, a Turkic language. And while we think of Russia as the land of Orthodox Christianity, these people, along with quite a few other republics, actually follow Islam. Now, the land of Bashkortostan is one of the most mineral-rich territories in Russia, making it of extreme importance. With a large share of Russian oil reserves, the republic is a main site of extraction, providing 17% of the country's gasoline and 15% of its diesel fuel. Because of this, Bashkortostan has been recognized as the republic with the lowest economic risk. But it's not just the oil that makes it so valuable. There's over 13,000 rivers in the republic, many making up part of the deep water transportation system of European Russia that provides access to ports of the Baltic and Black Seas. Over 1/3 of its territory, or 24,000 square miles, is rich in woodlands. And while this isn't particularly unique, the relevance of this is Bashkir forests concentrate the most extensive areas of honey-bearing vegetation in the country. So, as you may guess, the republic is famous for their beekeeping traditions and produces some of the best honey in not only Russia but the entire world. gaining international recognition for its quality and unique flavors, attributed to the diverse flora of the region. If we were to go a little bit southwest from Bashkortostan, we'd find ourselves in the Republic of Kalmykia. Now, this is a strange one, because Kalmykia is home to the Kalmyks, who are of Mongol origin, making them the only European people of Mongolian origin. And as we know about Mongolians, their main religion is Buddhism, and the same holds true for the Kalmyks. That's right, Kalmykia is the only place in all of Europe where Buddhism is the main religion too. In addition to this, the Republic of Kalmykia is one of the only regions in the world where tulips grow in natural conditions on untouched lands. So when they have their annual tulip festival in April, it is as colorful as well as cultural as it gets. One of the past presidents of the Republic of Kalmykia was Kirsan Ilyumzhinov, who led from 1993 to 2010. And he was also the president of FIDE, the Chess International Governing Body, from 1995 to 2018. Given his passion for the game, the city of Elista, which is the capital of Kalmykia, hosted the 33rd Chess Olympiad in 1998, for which an entire chess-themed complex named City Chess was built, as well as the World Championships in 2006. Because of this, chess is heavily ingrained in the culture of the Republic, making it a national pastime. At one point, chess lessons were even made mandatory in schools. This mix of wildly unique attributes make Kalmykia undoubtedly one of the most interesting places of Europe. But let's get away from Europe for a bit, and instead jump to the complete opposite end of Russia, particularly here, the Sakha Republic, or Yakutia. Located in the Russian Far East region, this is all just one republic, believe it or not. Covering almost 1.2 million square miles, it is the largest political entity that isn't its own country. But if we were to rank it among countries by size, it'd come 8th, between India and Argentina. As you can guess, this is an extremely cold part of the world. Sakha is known for this, with the Verkhoyansk Range being the coldest area in the northern hemisphere, and some of the lowest natural temperatures ever recorded have been here. One of its towns, Oymyakon, is the coldest permanently inhabited human settlement on Earth, with an average winter temperature of -58 degrees Fahrenheit. About 40% of Sakha lies above the Arctic Circle, and all of it is covered by permafrost. As you can tell, much of this republic's vast and wild landmass is uninhabited or very sparsely populated. Yet, despite this, its capital, Yakutsk, is the world's coldest major city, with an average annual temperature of 17 degrees. The people who live here are known as the Yakuts, belonging to a Turkic ethnic group native to North Siberia. They speak Yakut, obviously, which is a Turkic language as well. But what's interesting is that the Yakut language differs from all other Turkic languages due to the presence of a layer of vocabulary of unclear origin. Despite the coldness of Yakutia, the Republic is actually a warm, vibrant place, at least figuratively speaking. The Yakut people celebrate their New Year twice, one in winter like the rest of everyone else, and one during the summer solstice, to celebrate the rebirth of nature after a hard winter and the triumph of life. They have a whole festival for this called Yiryak, where there's national Yakut rituals, ceremonies, folk dancing, horse racing, music, national cuisine, and competitions in traditional Yakut sports. Outside of the cultural traditions, in Yakutsk, the city has an increasingly lively film industry that has been gaining international recognition over recent years for its unique style, the way its filmmakers portray the Republic and its people. It's even been titled Sakha Wood. Now moving all the way back west through Russia, situated along the Caspian Sea and to the right of the Chechen Republic, which is, by the way, Russia's most troublesome and hard-to-control republic. But that's another whole video on its own, is Dagestan. In complete contrast to Yakutia, this is one of the warmest places in Russia, but also it's the most diverse republic of them all. With a population of just 3.1 million people, there's over 30 ethnic groups and 81 nationalities, with 14 official languages too. In Dagestan, due to its proximity to the Middle East, a large 83% of the population is Islamic. The name Dagestan is a hybrid of Turkic and Persian, translating to land of mountains, which is definitely true. It's renowned for its rugged terrain, with the Greater Caucasus mountain range running through it. This geography has not only created stunning landscapes, but also created a strong tradition of mountaineering sports. Perhaps the most famous sport of them all here, though, is martial arts. Despite the Republic's small size, a number of truly world-class fighters have come out of there, such as Khabib Nurmagomedov and Islam Makhachev, just to name a few. One of its cities, Derbent, claims to be the oldest city in Russia, with historical documentation dating to the 8th century BC, making it one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world overall. Really, all of Russia's republics are unique in one way or another. Many of them even want to be their own country because of it too, and as a result, basically all of them have had secession movements. Key to understanding this is knowing the difference between Ruskiye and Rosyan. Ruskiye refers to ethnic Russians, about 78% of the population, while Rosyan are all citizens of Russia, regardless of background. Think of it like English and British. Being English means you're both English and British, but being British can mean being Welsh or Scottish. Similarly, a Ruski is also a Rosyanin, but a Tatar can only be a Rosyanin, not a Ruskiye. Politicians have been mindful of this, to not offend anyone. For example, Putin almost always opts for the term Rosyan in his speeches to cover all bases amongst the Russian people. However, the 2020 constitution amendments define Ruskiye as Russia's, quote, state-building people, the main people in the country. This isn't exactly surprising, because, as I said, Putin has tried to Russify ethnic culture for years. And whether or not the constitutional wording can be open to interpretation doesn't matter, because with the invasion of Ukraine, we're seeing the intensification of this in real life. Ethnic minorities in Russia's republics have been by far the focus of mobilization efforts for the war. For instance, in the Tuva Republic, there's been 1 soldier killed for every 3,300 adults, while in Moscow that figure is 1 to 480,000 adults. And that men from the Republic of Buryatia, whose residents are descended from Mongols, are 75 times more likely to die than men from Moscow. Meanwhile, the BBC found that 6 of the 10 Russian regions with the highest mortality rates in Ukraine are located in Siberia and the Far East. This has of course angered many republics, with countless organizations being formed to oppose it. But nothing has changed. It would take a perfect storm of challenges attacking at a moment of vulnerability to make Russia collapse and have republics gain independence, like a prison escape. But it's a storm that's happened twice in the last century, during the Russian Revolution and the end of the Cold War. Now, this would probably not happen under Putin. Hate him or love him, he's proved himself competent. Putin survived threats to Russia, even a coup attempt, and his grip on power during his tenure has become more powerful throughout it. A post-Russian world would have to follow a post-Putin one. There's no telling what the republics would look like after a hypothetical collapse of Russia. According to the Free Nations of Post-Russia Forum, a forum founded by a group of exiled Russian separatists who facilitates discussions among the dozens of independence movements across Russia to plan for the so-called eventual collapse and decolonization of Russia, they predict the new countries would generally follow the same borders they did as oblasts and republics, like this. But let's be real here, they most likely wouldn't. Lines on a defunct map wouldn't be important in a revolution, but more importantly, Russia in some form would still exist after a dissolution. Even if the Russian government was completely deposed, many people in Western Russia are ethnically Russian. Unless oligarchs split it into their own factions, most, if not all, of central and northwestern Russia and parts of the Volga region would stick together and become the successor state to Russia. There's also a chance, if history repeats itself, or at least rhymes as they say, that a new Russian republic could become another imperial state rather than a democracy, doubling down on their expansionist policies over the centuries and looking to reconquer some of its territories. While the international community would be united on dealing with the nuclear question, each country would respond to the crisis in its own way. Japan, for example, might try to reclaim the Kuril Islands they lost after World War II, but it's more difficult to predict what America and its allies in Europe would do if Russia collapsed. They may send troops like they did during the Russian Civil War, this time to secure nuclear bombs and fuel, or they could follow a hands-off approach as they did in 1991, letting independence movements play out and serve as the mediator during negotiations between the many new post-Russian states, just the ones in the West, far away from China of course. NATO would continue to exist following the collapse of the Russian Federation, and probably become even more important because of it. The new Russian Republic may be weaker, but could be a threat to its neighbors, and because of this, many post-Russian republics could try to join NATO, much like how countries in the Eastern Bloc have in the decades since independence. All of this is purely hypothetical, I remind you. And if Russia does somehow collapse, the republics may not even want to leave. The younger Russians of non-ethnic Russian background are increasingly identifying a wider Russian identity, seeing their ethnic heritage as a more regional one. Also, leaving Russia would cost these regions a lot of money, especially the poorer ones, and the average person doesn't want to upend their lives with open rebellion where reform may be possible. Nevertheless, Russia is extremely diverse. These 21 republics may as well be 21 countries in their uniqueness, but whether they may one day break free from the chains of Moscow remains to be seen. Thank you for watching.